The November wind swept through the bus shelter with that particular bite that comes just before winter truly settles in. Robert Hayes stood there, collar turned up against the chill, watching the occasional car pass by on the wet pavement. He was 62 years old, with silver hair that had once been dark brown, and the kind of weathered face that spoke of a life lived honestly, if not always easily. His coat was worn but clean, a grey wool jacket he'd owned for nearly 15 years. It had seen him through job losses, through his daughter's wedding, through the quiet years after his wife Margaret had passed. The lining was coming loose at one shoulder, but he'd sewn it back himself just last week. The bus was running late again. 20 minutes now, according to the electronic sign that flickered uncertainly in the gathering dusk. Robert didn't mind so much. After 30 years working in the warehouse district, the last 5 spent as a night security guard at an office complex, he'd learned that hurrying rarely got you anywhere faster. Life moved at its own pace, regardless of what the schedule said. He noticed her then, a woman standing at the far end of the shelter, away from the small amount of protection the plexiglass walls offered. She wore a navy blue business suit, well-tailored but clearly not designed for this weather. No coat. No scarf. She was perhaps in her mid-50s, with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. Those strands had come loose in the wind. Her arms were wrapped tightly around herself, and even from where he stood, Robert could see her shivering. She looked out of place at this particular bus stop, which usually served the factory workers and cleaning crews heading to the industrial park. Her leather briefcase sat beside her feet, and she kept glancing at her phone with an expression Robert recognized, that look of someone whose plans had gone terribly wrong. For a moment, Robert hesitated. People in cities learned to keep to themselves. You didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. But his mother's voice came to him clearly, as it often did in moments like these. Robert, she used to say, being kind costs you nothing, and it might mean everything to someone else. He walked over slowly, keeping his distance so as not to startle her. Excuse me, he said gently. I don't mean to intrude, but you look awful cold there. She glanced up, and he saw her eyes were tired, carrying the weight of what had clearly been a difficult day. I'm fine, thank you, she said, but her voice trembled slightly, betraying her. Robert nodded, understanding pride when he saw it. I'm sure you are, he said kindly. But this wind is something fierce tonight, and the bus doesn't look like it's coming anytime soon. Would you mind if I offered you my jacket? Just until we are both where we need to be. The woman looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her expression softened. Perhaps it was the genuine concern in his voice, or perhaps it was simply that she was too cold to maintain her defenses. I couldn't, she said. You'll freeze. Oh, I've got a good sweater underneath, Robert assured her, which was only partly true. And I've been standing in weather like this for more years than I care to count. You build up something of a tolerance. He smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. Besides, my late wife would have my hide if she knew I stood here watching someone freeze while I had a perfectly good jacket going unused. The mention of his late wife seemed to touch something in the woman. She smiled back, a real smile this time, though sadness lingered at its edges. Your wife sounds like she was a wonderful person. She was, Robert said simply. Best thing that ever happened to me, Margaret was. 40 years we had together before cancer took her. 3 years ago this past September. He said it matter-of-factly, the way people do when grief has become a familiar companion rather than an overwhelming force. I'm so sorry, the woman said, and meant it. Thank you, Robert began unbuttoning his jacket. Now, will you humor an old man and take this coat? It would genuinely make me feel better. She hesitated one more moment, then nodded. All right. Thank you. That's very kind of you, Mr. Hayes. Robert Hayes. But please, just Robert. He slipped off the jacket and held it out to her. I'm Ellen, she said, taking the coat and putting it on gratefully. It was too large for her, hanging past her hands and smelling faintly of laundry detergent and something else, perhaps old books, or the particular scent of a house long lived in. She pulled it close. Oh, that's so much better. Thank you, Robert. They stood together in more companionable silence for a moment, both watching the empty street. Finally, Ellen spoke again. I have to admit, today has been challenging. This kindness means more than you might realize. Robert glanced at her and saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. He looked away politely, giving her privacy. Some days are like that, he said gently. They test us in ways we don't expect. I've had my share of them. Do you mind if I ask, what do you do, Robert? Security guard. Night shift mostly, over at the Riverside office park. Been doing it about 5 years now. Before that, I worked in inventory management at a distribution center. 30 years at that job before they restructured. He said it without bitterness. That's how things go sometimes. You adjust. Ellen was quiet for a moment. How did you adjust? If you don't mind me asking. Robert thought about it. Well, it wasn't easy at first, I'll admit. I was 57, and suddenly the job I'd had since I was 27 was gone. Margaret was sick by then. We knew what was coming, even if we didn't talk about it much. The money from the security work wasn't as good, but it was honest work, and it gave me flexible hours so I could be with her. He paused, remembering. I think Margaret taught me how to adjust, really. She used to say that life is like a river. You can either fight the current and exhaust yourself, or you can learn to swim with it and find your way to calmer waters. So that's what I tried to do. I found the calmer waters where I could. That's beautiful, Ellen said softly. And wise. Your Margaret was clearly a remarkable woman. She was. She really was. Robert smiled, lost in memory for a moment. We met when we were both 22, at a church social. I was so nervous I spilled punch all over my shirt. She laughed, not at me, you understand, but in this warm way that made me laugh too. She handed me a napkin and said, well, at least now you have an interesting story to tell. And I suppose I did. Ellen laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise her. I needed that. Thank you. You're welcome. Robert stuttered the electronic sign again. Bus should be here in about 10 minutes now, looks like. Though I've learned not to trust these things too much. What made you come to this particular stop tonight? Ellen asked. You mentioned you work at Riverside. Isn't that in the other direction? It is, Robert confirmed. But I had to take my daughter Jennifer to the train station this afternoon. She lives upstate with her husband and my 2 grandchildren. She comes down every few months to visit. Today was her birthday. Actually, she's 34 now. Can you imagine? Seems like just yesterday she was learning to ride her bicycle. He chuckled. Anyway, I took the bus with her to the station, saw her off, and now I'm heading back home to get a few hours of sleep before my shift starts at 11. That's lovely that you spent her birthday with her. Well, she's my daughter. Only one I've got. And those grandchildren, Emma's 7 and little Tommy just turned 5, they won't be little forever. You have to grab those moments while you can. Something in Ellen's expression shifted, became more melancholy. You do, she said quietly. You really do. Robert sensed pain there but didn't pry. Instead, he said, Are you heading home from work? Ellen laughed, but there was no humor in it. In a manner of speaking. I've had a rather dramatic day, actually. I resigned from my position this afternoon. 28 years with the company, and I just walked away. Robert raised his eyebrows. That must have been quite a decision. It was. She paused, seeming to weigh how much to share with this kind stranger. I was, the CEO of Morrison Technologies. Maybe you've heard of them. Robert thought for a moment. The software company? Over in the business district. That's the one. I built that company from a small startup in my garage to what it is today. 800 employees. 300 million in revenue last year. She said it without boasting, just stating facts. And today, the board asked me to approve layoffs. 200 people. Good people, many of whom have been with me for years. People with families and mortgages and dreams. Robert listened carefully, hearing the weight in her words. Ellen continued, her voice thick with emotion. They said it was necessary for profit margins. For shareholder value. They showed me spreadsheets and projections, all very logical and reasonable. And I looked at those numbers, and I looked at the faces in the photographs on my wall, employees at company picnics, at holiday parties, and I couldn't do it. So you quit, Robert said gently. So I quit. Ellen nodded. I told them that if those layoffs were necessary, they have to find someone else to authorize them. Because I didn't build that company to throw people away when it was convenient. I built it to create something